The woman struggled to push her wagon up the hill, until a silent cowboy left his horse standing near hers. Nebraska Territory, 1867. The merciless summer sun bore down on my back, a searing brand that had long since baked the hope from my bones. I leaned into the wagon, my thin arms shaking under the strain. Lonesome Pass rose steep and mocking before me, its brutal slope chewing into the wagon wheels, each inch a victory for the dust and a defeat for my spirit. My dress, soaked with sweat, clung to me like a second skin as I hissed through clenched teeth. "Come on!" My single, weary mule groaned pitifully, worn down by the long, brutal haul from street. "Louie." I pushed harder, my boots slipping in the loose earth, the burden of a new life suddenly heavier than I could bear. This was not the frontier of my dreams. It was a brutal, unforgiving reality that gnawed at me with every step, a vast, desolate expanse that had swallowed my husband, Owen, whole. He had been a man of big words and small actions, a man who had promised me a new life out west, a land of opportunity where his grand plans would finally come to fruition. But a fever had taken him in Independence, leaving me with an empty wagon, a half-starved mule, and a heart full of disillusionment. The raw wound in my soul, where my trust in his promises had once been, throbbed with every failing push. Then, a sound cut through the desolate silence, a low, guttural growl that was not the wind, not the groaning of the wagon, but something else entirely. I froze, my heart seizing in my chest. The mule's ears twitched nervously. I glanced back, my eyes scanning the endless stretch of grass behind me, and saw it. Not a man, not an animal, but a dark, swirling dust cloud, moving with an unnatural speed, not on the trail, but across the open plain. It was a monstrous, silent funnel, and within its churning depths I could just make out a flicker of something metallic, a glint of sunlight on a blade. It was not a storm, and it was moving directly toward me. Fear, cold and sharp, cut through the exhaustion. I had a choice to make, one that would determine if I lived to see another sunset. I could keep pushing, pray that I could make it over the pass, or I could unhitch the mule and make a run for it. But my husband's empty promises had taught me a bitter lesson. There was no running from a storm. With a sudden surge of something that felt like a mix of terror and defiance, I grabbed the rifle from the side of the wagon, my hands trembling as I loaded a bullet into the chamber. Whatever was coming for me, I was not going to let it take my life without a fight. My story was not going to end on a desolate hill, a victim of the frontier. If you enjoy the story, hit that subscribe button right away, and if you don't, then just hit the like button anyway to keep more Wild West love stories coming. The sun was a searing orb in a sky of bleached blue, relentless in its assault. Every muscle in her body screamed in protest, but she ignored the pain. She had to. There was no one else to take the burden. The wagon was her last link to a past that was already a distant, painful memory. Inside lay the few possessions she had managed to salvage from the wreckage of her life, her mother's chipped china, a small chest of books, and the tools of her trade, the delicate embroidery needles and threads that were her only hope for a future. It wasn't much, but it was all she had left, and the thought of leaving any of it behind felt like abandoning the last vestiges of her identity. Yet beneath the steel in her grip, grief still gnawed grief that had been her companion for 3 long months. She let out a frustrated sob, the sound swallowed by the vast, empty silence of the landscape. It was a silence that was more terrifying than any noise, a silence that spoke of loneliness and a crushing isolation. It was the silence of a woman who had given everything, only to be left with nothing. For 3 months, she had battled this silence, this emptiness, and the raw, unceasing grief for a life that had never been. The dreams of a peaceful homestead, of children playing in the grass, of a husband who was truly a partner, they had all been scattered to the winds like dust. The road ahead was not one of opportunity, but of unending toil and a constant nagging fear. The fear of failure, the fear of the unknown, the fear of what a lone woman in this untamed land might face. Hoofbeats drummed behind her, faint at first, then growing louder, until a tall shadow fell across her bent frame. She paused, wiping her brow with the back of her hand, and turned. A man on a dark stallion sat watching her. He said nothing. The brim of his hat shaded most of his face, but she saw the square jaw, a day or two's stubble darkening his chin. He was a man of the land, rugged and weathered, his posture relaxed yet alert, like a coiled spring. His eyes, though hidden, felt like they were piercing right through her, seeing not just the struggling woman, but the soul-crushing weight she carried. In one smooth motion, he dismounted and tied his horse beside her flagging mule. Clara froze, startled, as the stranger moved to the back of the wagon and pressed his broad shoulders against it. He glanced at her, his eyes, the color of a stormy sea, sharp against his sun-darkened skin. "Push," he rumbled, his voice low and rough from long silence. There was no demand in the word, no hint of an expectation of gratitude, just a simple, direct command, a hand reaching out in the dark, not for thanks, but for a simple shared effort. He wasn't there to save her, but to help her save herself. She hesitated a heartbeat, then dug in again. With his strength added to hers, the wagon creaked forward, sluggish at first, then rolling with a steady momentum. At the crest, Clara sagged against the sideboard, chest heaving. The man straightened, tipped his hat with one finger. "Thank you," Clara finally managed, her voice shaky. "I don't know what I'd have done if you hadn't shown up." The words felt inadequate, a flimsy attempt to thank someone who had offered an act of true, selfless grace. He gave a single nod, eyes flicking from the weary mule to the overloaded wagon, then to her face. "Where's your husband?" he asked flatly. "Dead," Clara answered, the bitterness still sharp after 8 months. "He took a fever near Independence." Something shifted in his eyes, a flicker of old pain, a brief, fleeting glimpse into a past he kept hidden. "Name's Silas Grant," he said after a pause. "Clara Sterling," she returned, offering her hand. He took it briefly, rough calluses brushing her palm. "Most folks call me stubborn." A hint of a smile ghosted across his lips. "Where you headed, Mrs. Sterling?" "Dustwood Creek," she said, nodding westward. "My brother's got land out that way." Silas's expression darkened. "That's 3 days on a good team. Your mule won't make it pulling this much alone." Clara lifted her chin, defiance flashing in her eyes. "I'll manage." "No," he said simply. "You won't." He glanced at the fading sky. "There's a creek a mile up. We'll camp there and sort this out in the morning." "We?" she shot back, though relief swelled inside her. "I don't remember asking for company, Mr. Grant." "You didn't need to," he replied, already untying his reins. "And it's just Silas." As he guided the wagon toward the promise of water, Clara studied the confident set of his shoulders, the way he carried himself. In 23 years, she had met plenty of men, her strict preacher father, her dreamer husband who never followed through, the countless opportunists who offered a widow protection on the trail. But something about Silas Grant was different. He carried a quietness, not from shyness, but from careful watching. Just as he said, the creek shimmered through the prairie grass. He helped unhitch the mule, tended both animals while Clara gathered wood. "You've done this before," he remarked as she built a small fire with practiced ease. 3 months on the trail," she said, striking a match. "You either learn or you don't last." Silas nodded, understanding. "I'll scare up some meat." He came back an hour later with 2 rabbits already skinned. Clara dropped them into the beans she had soaking, tossed in wild onions from the bank. Silence stretched as the stew bubbled, broken only by her stolen glances at him. Younger than she first guessed, maybe 30. Lines at his eyes from squinting at sun and sorrow. The sorrow, she felt, was a deep, untalked-about thing, a wound that had healed over, but still left a scar. "What takes you to Dustwood Creek?" she asked at last. "Work," he said, feeding sticks to the fire. "I'm a farrier and a blacksmith. I shoe horses, mend wheels, hammer out whatever's broke." Clara had to admit, his hands looked the part strong, calloused, but with a certain precision to their movements. "My brother says Dustwood Creek is growing. Store church. Maybe more soon." "I've heard the same," Silas said, his eyes unreadable in the dusk. They ate quietly, the stew warming her belly. It had been a long time since she'd shared supper with anyone. Nights on the trail were lonely, always listening for threats in the dark. "You should rest," Silas said when she finished. "I'll take first watch." "You don't have to," Clara protested, though fatigue tugged at her. "Territory ain't as tame as it looks," he said, hand drifting to the pistol on his hip. "Plenty of bandits hunting easy pickings." Outlaws were always on the lookout for easy pickings. Clara Sterling wanted to protest, to tell him she wasn't so helpless, that she'd made it this far on grit alone. But deep down, she knew the truth. A lone woman hauling a wagon full of belongings was exactly the sort of prize road agents dreamed of. "Thank you," she said instead, slipping back to her wagon and rolling out her bedding. Just before tugging the canvas closed, she caught one last look at Silas Grant. His profile was carved in firelight, steady and unflinching against the wide prairie night. He was a silent sentinel, a guardian she hadn't asked for but desperately needed. Morning broke with dew shining in the grass and birds lifting their song to the sky. Clara woke more rested than she had in months, puzzled at first by the quiet calm that greeted her dawn. Then she remembered she wasn't alone anymore. By the creek she found Silas washing the dust from his face with cold water. His shirt hung loose on the bank, revealing scars lacing his back like cruel handwriting. They were the kind left by a whip, not a soldier's bullet. Clara quickly turned her gaze aside, though not before seeing the wiry strength built from years of hard work. The scars told a story of a different kind of pain, a deep betrayal, a past that still haunted him. It was a private grief, a burden he carried alone, etched forever on his skin. "Morning," she called out, making her presence known. He straightened, pulling his shirt over his shoulders. "Morning," he answered, nodding toward the fire where coffee already brewed. "Hope you don't mind I took the liberty." "Not at all." She poured herself a tin cup and let the bitter warmth settle her. "Did you get any sleep?" she asked. "Enough," he said, though she doubted he had rested much at all. Then his tone turned practical. "We need to talk about that wagon." Clara sighed, bracing for what she already knew was coming. "The mule can't haul it alone," Silas said, "and you're dragging too much weight. We'll have to cut it down." The words struck deep. Everything she owned lay in that wagon. Her past, her husband Owen's empty promises, her own fragile hopes. "I can't just leave it all behind," she began. But he was already shaking his head. "You'll never make Dustwood Creek otherwise. Not with winter closing in. You don't want to be caught on these plains when the snow falls." She knew he was right, though the thought of abandoning more pieces of her life knotted her stomach. "What do you suggest?" "My horse can help pull," he said. "But even then, a third of the load has to go. Keep only what keeps you alive or can't be replaced." So they spent the morning sorting through her life. The cherry table her grandmother had left her too heavy. 3 of her 5 dresses luxuries. Books, china. The small writing desk she'd once hoped to teach from all gone. Every piece set aside felt like tearing something from her chest. And yet with each loss, she felt leaner, tougher, stripped down to what mattered most. "You're keeping that?" Silas asked, nodding at the battered violin case. "Yes," Clara said firmly. "It was Owen's. He taught music." Silas only nodded, not pressing further. "Can you play?" "Not well," she admitted softly. "He was trying to teach me when." Her voice broke, the memory too raw. By noon they had reorganized the lighter wagon. Silas rigged a harness so his horse and her mule could pull together, then stashed the discarded belongings in a hollow, covering them with stones. "If you'd like," he said, "we can send someone back for these things once you're settled." Clara understood the kindness in his words, but they both knew she would never see those items again. By afternoon, they were rolling smoother, the team pulling with ease. Silas rode alongside, eyes sweeping the horizon, making Clara wonder what ghosts or dangers he kept expecting. "How long have you been out here?" she asked, craving conversation. "Since '59. Came for the gold rush, stayed for the land. Did you ever strike it rich?" A crooked grin tugged at his face. "Found more trouble than gold. And as for family?" The question slipped out before she could stop it. "None at all. None living," he answered after a long pause, his tone shutting down any further prying. They covered close to 15 miles before making camp at a trickle of water. Their routine came easy. He saw to the stock, she built supper. Together, the work felt lighter. As twilight spread lavender and gold across the sky, Clara found herself watching him mend a loose strap on her wagon. His hands were sure, strong, but precise. "Why are you helping me?" she asked suddenly. Silas's hand stopped, then moved again. "Does it matter?" "Yes," she pressed. "Most men expect payment for their kindness." He lifted his gaze, stormy blue eyes meeting hers straight on. "When I was a boy, my mother tried to cross these plains. Our wagon busted an axle. Nobody stopped to help. She died of fever before we made it to the next post." He turned back to his work. "I swore I'd never ride past someone in need, especially not a woman alone." The plain honesty of his words moved Clara deeper than any gallant promise. "I'm sorry about your mother," she said softly. He gave a short nod, accepting her sympathy without dwelling on it. "We should reach Boone Creek tomorrow evening. There's a trading post there," he said. "We can restock. After that, 2 more days to Dustwood Creek if the weather holds." Clara nodded, though for the first time she felt a strange heaviness. She had been clinging to this goal for months, her brother Arthur Sterling waiting, the chance for a new life. Yet on the edge of reaching it, she wasn't sure why her heart sank at the thought. The thought of reaching her destination now felt like the end of something she had just found. If you like Wild West love stories or Wild West stories, drop a bunch of 1 second, and your place in the comments for the Wild West Love channel. Tell me where you're listening from, so I don't feel so alone out here. For months, Clara Sterling had clung to one thought: finding her brother and starting fresh. Yet now, with that goal nearly in reach, a strange hesitation stirred in her chest. That night, lying in the wagon while the prairie wind whistled through the tall grass, her mind turned not toward Dustwood Creek, but toward the man stretched beneath the stars outside. A stranger only days before, Silas Grant had somehow become the one she trusted with her very life. The West had a way of forging bonds quick and fierce, cramming months of knowing into a handful of hard days. Morning broke with a heaviness in the air, the promise of rain. Silas studied the western sky. The clouds piled dark and mean. "We need to move," he warned as they hurried to break camp. "That's a gully washer rolling in." They pushed the animals hard, the team sensing the storm and surging forward with nervous energy. By midday, thunder rolled, and the sky was nearly swallowed by black clouds. "Cottonwoods ahead, 3 miles," Silas shouted over the rising wind. "We'll take shelter there." The rain struck in sheets, blinding and cold, soaking Clara through in minutes. She gripped the wagon seat as lightning split the sky. Silas's jaw tightened, his focus locked on keeping the team from bolting. The cottonwoods rose like ghosts in the downpour, their broad limbs offering a break from the storm. Silas steered them under the canopy where the rain eased to a steady drip. Inside the wagon, he called over the thunder, "I'll handle the stock." She hated leaving him out there, but knew the horses needed calming first. Clambering inside, she stripped off her drenched clothes, pulled on dry ones, and readied blankets and a lantern. When Silas finally ducked in, he was soaked to the bone, hair plastered dark across his forehead. Without thinking, Clara pressed a blanket into his hands and tugged off his sodden jacket. "You'll catch your death like this," she scolded, falling into old habits of caring for others. "Wouldn't be the first time, I've weathered worse," he said, but he wrapped himself in the blanket with quiet gratitude. The wagon was cramped with both of them inside, their knees nearly touching as the lantern threw a soft glow between them. Outside, the storm howled through the branches and hammered against the canvas. Silas glanced at the sky through a gap. "Might as well settle in. We're not moving till it passes." Clara nodded, suddenly aware of how close they sat, the scent of rain clinging to him, droplets still shining on his lashes. A charge hummed in the air, thicker than the storm. "Tell me about your brother," Silas asked, breaking the silence. "Arthur's 3 years older. He fought for the Union, then headed west when it ended. Said he couldn't stomach Ohio after all he'd seen." She traced a finger along the blanket. "He wrote that he found peace in Dustwood Creek, building something new. When Owen died, he told me to come." "And what will you do there?" "They need a school teacher. I taught back in street, Louis, before I married. A faint smile touched her lips. "I always loved helping children discover the world in books." "You'll be good at it," Silas said firmly. "How would you know that?" she asked, surprised. "I've watched you. You're patient with the mule, with mending things. You don't rush. That's what makes a good teacher." His words warmed her more than the blanket. "And you? Will you stay in Dustwood Creek?" "For a while," he said vaguely, "till something else pulls me along. Tried putting down roots once, didn't stick." Their eyes met, and for an instant, Clara saw a loneliness in him that echoed her own. "Everyone needs a place to belong," she said softly. A crash of thunder split the sky. Silas's hand closed over hers instinctively. For a moment neither moved, the simple touch sparking something unspoken. Then he pulled back, clearing his throat. "Storm's on top of us. Horses will be jumpy. Will they be all right?" she asked, voice unsteady. "I tied them down well. They've seen storms." He listened to the roar outside. "Lows will flood. We may need another route tomorrow." His steady words brought back a sense of normalcy. But Clara couldn't shake the memory of his hand on hers, or the look they had shared. They passed the hours with talk, Silas spinning tales of the trails he'd ridden, towns he'd seen, people he'd crossed paths with. Clara shared bits of her childhood in Ohio, her years teaching, and the dreams that drew her west despite the risks. Some topics they avoided: his life before the territories, her marriage, the griefs they both carried. Still, in the dim glow of the lantern, she felt she was coming to know him in ways few ever had. When the storm softened to a steady rain, exhaustion took hold. Silas rose, shrugging back into his damp coat. Despite Clara's protests, he insisted on sleeping outside. "It wouldn't be proper," he said simply, stepping out into the wet night. "It wouldn't be proper," Silas Grant said, tugging on his still damp coat. "In the middle of nowhere, propriety seems a strange worry," Clara Sterling replied with a dry smile, though she didn't press him. For all the trust that had grown between them, they were still, in truth, strangers. At the wagon's flap, Silas paused, his tall frame outlined in the lantern glow. "Thank you," he said quietly. "For what?" she asked. "The talk. Been a long spell since I said that much." With that, he was gone, leaving Clara to wonder how fate had brought this solitary man into her path, and at the feelings stirring in her heart, feelings a woman of less than a year, a widow, had no right to entertain. "Hey there, friend, take a moment and get yourself a full glass of water. It's easy to forget, but staying hydrated is crucial for your health. Also, if you've been sitting for a while, do a quick lap around the room and give your eyes a break from the screen. Your body will thank you." Dawn came clear and sharp, the world scrubbed clean by the storm. As Silas had warned, the lowlands lay underwater, forcing them to take a longer road that added half a day's ride. "We won't reach Boone Creek before night," he said, studying the flooded ground. "But there's a homestead 10 miles west. They might give us shelter." The detour cut through rougher country, with rocky ridges and patches of brush instead of open prairie. Silas grew more watchful, his hand drifting often toward his revolver, eyes scanning the horizon. "Something wrong?" Clara asked, when he allowed only the briefest stop at midday. "Bad reputation here," he said, steadying her back onto the wagon seat. "Best not to linger." By late afternoon, she understood his unease. A blackened wagon lay ahead, burned to its bones and stripped bare by scavengers. Silas urged their team past without comment, but his jaw was tight. "Raiders," Clara whispered. He gave a short nod. "They prey on settlers, especially those traveling light." "Like us," she murmured, her stomach nodding. "We'll be fine," Silas assured her, though his hand checked the rifle in its scabbard. "Just keep sharp." As the sun dipped, a homestead appeared. Cabin, barn, corral, smoke curling from the chimney. A gray-bearded man stood in the doorway, rifle across his arms. "Stay here," Silas told Clara, dismounting and walking forward with empty hands raised. "Afternoon," he called, looking for a place to bed down. "Storms flooded our way to Boone Creek." The homesteader squinted. "Just the two of you?" "Yes, sir. I'm Silas Grant. The lady is Clara Sterling, a traveler bound for Dustwood Creek to join her kin." Something in Silas's voice or bearing eased the man's suspicion. He lowered the rifle. "Name's Jed Thorne. My wife Nell's inside. You can use the barn." "We're obliged," Silas said, motioning Clara to bring the wagon up. The Thornes proved kinder than their wary greeting. Nell, a small woman with gentle eyes and quick hands, pressed them to sit at her table. "First company in 3 months," she explained, serving venison stew and cornbread. "Most steer clear of this road on account of Marshal Kane's gang." "They're the raiders?" Clara asked. Jed nodded grimly. "Been tormenting folks out here near 2 years. Army can't pin him down, and the territorial marshals are stretched thin." "How many ride with him?" Silas asked, his tone calm, but his eyes intent. "5 last we heard, led by a man named Marshal Kane." Jed's look sharpened. "You've heard of him?" "I've heard stories," Silas answered carefully. "Lately they've been thick around Boone Creek. That trading post draws new settlers, plenty to steal." Jed tore a piece of cornbread. "Word is they're planning something big." The talk shifted to weather, winter prospects, scraps of news from travelers. Yet Clara noticed Silas's mind was elsewhere. His polite replies edged with distraction. Later, after helping Nell clear the table, Clara and Silas moved to the barn. They laid their bedrolls on opposite sides of the hay-strewn floor. As Clara settled her blanket, she couldn't shake the distance in him. "You've been quiet all evening," she said as he checked the doors. "Just thinking on the road ahead. Is it the Kane gang?" He turned, face unreadable. "We'll be fine if we stay to the main trail. Dustwood Creek's only 2 days off." "That's not what I asked," Clara pressed, sensing what he wasn't saying. Silas ran a hand through his hair, frustration slipping through. "The less you know, Clara, the safer you'll be." The formality stung after the closeness they'd shared. "I think we're past Mrs. Sterling, don't you? I've seen enough danger not to be sheltered like a child." He studied her, weighing something in his mind. At last, he came over and sat on a hay bale near her. His voice dropped. "Marshal Kane isn't just another outlaw. He was a Confederate guerrilla, rode with Quantrill's raiders. When the war ended, he brought his men west and kept fighting his own war. They go after Union vets, government men, anyone they mark as an enemy. Like my brother," Clara whispered, a chill running through her. "Arthur Sterling fought for the Union," Silas said with a short nod. "Dustwood Creek's much the same, settled mostly by Northerners and freedmen hunting a new start. That's the kind of place Marshal Kane hates." Clara's eyes narrowed. "How do you know so much about him?" A shadow darkened Silas's face. "Our paths crossed once." He said no more, only stood and moved back toward his bedroll. "Get some rest. We'll ride at first light." Sleep would not come for Clara. Her thoughts spun with questions about the man guarding her. Silas claimed to be a farrier. But there was something in his eyes when he spoke of Marshal Kane, something personal that went deeper than campfire tales of an outlaw. At dawn, a heavy mist clung to the fields around the Thorne homestead. Silas was already at work loading the wagon when Clara stepped out of the barn, her meager belongings packed. Nell Thorne pressed food into her hands, fresh bread, strips of dried venison, a jar of peaches. "It ain't much, but it'll sweeten the trail," she said with a warm smile. "And mind yourselves on the road to Boone Creek. Jed swears riders have been watching the trail." Silas thanked them kindly, though his thoughts seemed elsewhere as he helped Clara to the seat and took the reins. They rode in near silence through the morning as the mist burned off into another sharp blue sky. The land grew rockier as they neared the Boone Creek foothills, country ripe for ambush. "I've been thinking," Clara said when they paused to water the animals. "Maybe we should skip Boone Creek altogether." Silas looked up from adjusting the harness. "That would mean no resupply." "Yes, but if Kane's men are watching the post like the Thornes said, it could be safer." "Don't we have enough to reach Dustwood Creek?" "Barely," he admitted. "But you might be right. There's a lesser trail 5 miles up. Rough going, but it'll keep us off the main road." Clara felt relief wash over her when he turned the wagon toward that path. Soon the trail narrowed, twisting through gullies and patches of scrub pine that blocked the view. Twice, Silas raised a hand, listening hard before letting them move on. "Are we being followed?" Clara whispered during one halt. "Not sure," Silas murmured, eyes sharp, "but it don't feel right." By mid-afternoon, they were boxed into a canyon, stone walls rising steep on both sides. Clara's hand drifted to the small derringer in her pocket, a gift from Arthur before she left Ohio. Her pulse quickened. Her fear proved true. As they rounded a bend, Silas hauled the team to a stop. 3 mounted riders blocked the trail, bandanas over their faces. "Down," Silas said quietly. "Under the wagon. Don't move till I tell you." Clara's heart pounded as she slipped to the ground, crouching behind the wheel. From there, she could see Silas standing tall, his body loose but ready as he faced the strangers. "Afternoon, gents," he called evenly. "Something I can do for you?" "That depends," the leader answered, his voice thick with a southern drawl. "We're looking for a woman on this trail, blonde, mid-22s. You seen her?" "Can't say I have," Silas replied coolly. "Just a farrier bound for Dustwood Creek." The man laughed, cold and humorless. "Funny, 'cause word came you left the Thorn place this morning with a woman and a wagon. Why don't you invite her out here? Ain't polite to keep a lady under a wagon." Clara's blood froze. They knew she was there. She saw Silas's grip tighten on his rifle. "I'm alone," he said flatly. "So, clear the road. I'd like to make Dustwood Creek before dark." "I don't think so." The leader drew his pistol with easy skill. "Marshal Kane wants a word with Clara Sterling, and what Kane wants, Kane gets." They knew her name. The realization hit Clara like a blow. "If you're watching on TV, don't hesitate, grab your phone and hit subscribe to my channel, so you'll never miss out on our amazing characters." What came next blurred together. Silas's rifle snapped up, 2 shots cracking in quick succession. One outlaw toppled from his horse with a cry. Another was thrown when his mount reared. The leader fired back, a bullet smashing wood inches from Silas's head. "Run!" Silas shouted, diving behind a boulder and firing again. For a heartbeat, Clara froze, terror rooting her in place until a slug tore through the wagon canvas above her. Jolted into action, she scrambled backward, keeping low until she found cover behind a fallen log. Gunfire roared in the canyon, each shot echoing off the rock walls. Through the smoke and thunder, she glimpsed Silas methodical, steady, his aim deliberate. He fought not like a simple blacksmith, but like a man seasoned by far darker battles. Movement flickered to Clara's left. The outlaw thrown earlier was crawling through the brush, angling to flank Silas Grant. Without thinking, Clara slipped her derringer from her pocket, braced herself, and fired as he passed. Her hands shook, but the shot found its mark. The man staggered, clutching his leg before Silas's rifle cracked again. The outlaw dropped where he stood, lifeless. For a moment, the canyon went still. Clara held her breath, straining to hear any sign of danger. At last, Silas's voice cut through. "Clara, are you hurt?" "I'm fine," she called back, though her voice trembled. She rose from behind the log, her knees weak. Silas stepped out from cover, rifle steady, scanning the ground. 2 bodies lay sprawled in the dust. The third, their leader, was gone. "He slipped away," Silas said grimly, reloading fast. "And he'll be back with more. We need to move." Clara stumbled to the wagon, her legs barely carrying her. "They knew my name," she whispered as Silas lifted her onto the seat. "Why would Marshal Kane's men be hunting me?" "I don't know," Silas muttered, jaw set as he took the reins. "But we'll learn the truth in Dustwood Creek." He cast a glance at the sinking Sunday. "We put miles behind us before dark. We can reach the edge of town by tomorrow night." They drove long past sundown, winding through foothill trails Silas seemed to know by heart. When they finally stopped, it was in a hollow ringed with tall pines, the firelight hidden from prying eyes. As they worked in silence, Clara studied him and knew. The cool precision with which he'd fought, the sure way he guided them, the calm control in chaos. This was no ordinary farrier. "Who are you, really?" she demanded once they sat by the fire. "And don't say you're just a farrier. No blacksmith shoots like that." For a long moment, Silas said nothing, the flames flickering in his eyes. At last, he spoke, his tone low, resigned. "I was a scout for the Union. After the war, I took the badge, U.S. Marshal." He held her gaze. "I've been trailing Marshal Kane's gang near a year. They've killed judges, settlers, anyone who stood in their path. You're a lawman, Clara whispered, the pieces snapping into place. That's why you're bound for Dustwood Creek. Silas nodded once. Word came Kane's planning something there. I didn't know it tied to you until today. But why me? I've never laid eyes on Marshal Kane. Maybe it ain't you at all, Silas said, though doubt tinged his voice. He targets Union men. Your brother Arthur Sterling fits that mark. Clara felt a chill. If they know about me, they know about him. We'll warn him, Silas promised. First thing when we ride in. For now, you need rest. I'll keep watch. But sleep eluded Clara. Her mind spun with fear and unanswered questions. Why would a guerrilla-turned-outlaw hunt her by name? What bond tied her fate to Marshal Kane? If you've made it this far, I know you're a true fan of WWL. From the bottom of my heart, I wish your day is filled with health and happiness, and may a little stroke of luck find you in the next 15 minutes. Don't forget to share it with me in the comments. As Silas and Clara pressed on, the rough country gave way to softer plains, with homesteads dotting the land. By afternoon, they crested a rise and finally saw Dustwood Creek. Clara breathed a sigh of relief, but Silas, ever vigilant, warned her not to let her guard down. If Kane had men in town, they would be watching. They entered the settlement on a quiet road. The town pulsed with a new energy, wagons rattled, riders passed, and new buildings rose. Clara's heart pounded as she searched every face, half for her brother, Arthur, and half for danger. Then, the schoolhouse came into view, and right beside it, a two-story blue house with a wide porch. As they stopped, the front door burst open. Arthur Sterling ran out, his face lighting up with shock and joy. "Clara," he called, racing down the steps. "Good Lord, we weren't expecting you for another week." Clara leaped from the wagon and ran into his arms, tears stinging her eyes, relief, exhaustion, and gratitude all at once. "Arthur," she gasped, "you're all right?" "Of course," he said, his confusion flickering as his gaze shifted to Silas, who stood at the wagon, his posture guarded even in this moment of reunion. "And who's this?" "This is Silas Grant," Clara said quickly. "He saved me when my team gave out on Lonesome Pass. I'd never have made it without him." Arthur, seeing her weariness, gently said, "Let's get you inside first. You look worn to the bone, and there's someone I'd like you to meet." He turned to Silas with a grateful nod. "You're welcome in my home, Mr. Grant. Any man who helps my sister has a place at my table." Silas dipped his head in thanks, but his eyes kept sweeping the street. "I'd be obliged if we see to the wagon and stock first, then maybe somewhere private to talk." Something in his tone set Arthur on edge, and his smile faded. "Of course, stables out back. We can talk in my study." As they led the wagon behind the house, Clara spotted a petite woman with auburn hair on the porch. Mary Sterling, Arthur's wife. The peaceful scene felt unreal after the perils of the trail. After tending to the animals and hauling Clara's trunk inside, Arthur ushered them into a snug study. Mary brought coffee, then left them for privacy. "All right, what's going on?" Arthur demanded, shutting the door. "You both look like you've seen specters." Silas looked at Clara, then faced her brother. "Mr. Sterling, I'm with the U.S. Marshals. I've been hunting an outlaw band led by Marshal Kane. Yesterday, we were jumped by 3 of his men, asking for your sister by name." The color drained from Arthur's face. "Kane," he breathed, collapsing into a chair. "You know him," Silas said flatly. Arthur nodded, his eyes darting to Clara with guilt and fear. "During the war, I served in a unit that hunted guerrillas in Missouri. Marshal Kane was among the worst. We cornered him, and he escaped. But most of his men died, including his younger brother. He swore vengeance. I wrote for you to come because I thought you'd be safer here than in Street Lewis. I never dreamed he'd strike at you on the trail." Clara's stomach turned. "You knew an outlaw might be after you, yet you urged me to cross half the frontier alone." "I arranged an escort," Arthur said quickly. "A man was supposed to meet your stage at Independence." "I never met him," Clara snapped. "Owen died in Independence, and I kept on alone until Silas found me." Arthur's shoulders sagged. "Then Kane must have taken him. God forgive me, Clara. I thought I was shielding you." Silas, who had listened in silence, spoke. Kane's man who rode off yesterday will bring word. He'll come here for both of you. Then we'll leave, Arthur said desperately. Tonight. I can ride east with Clara. Running won't solve it, Silas said firmly. Kane will track you. We ended here in Dustwood.